Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kirsten, and together with my sister, Lynn, we created the Anti-Racist Table, which is a multi-dimensional platform aimed at bringing anti-racism into life as a daily practice. If you're new to the Anti-Racist Table, we just want to tell you a little bit about our platform and our work. We do this work primarily with our free self-paced 30-day challenge, which we just upgraded our platform to make it a lot easier for people to self-pace. We have people doing it by themselves. We have people doing it in community. This is deep, a long study, anti-racism work that's really foundational. It's got videos, it's got music, it's got reading, it's got audio, it's got art, it's got meditation, journaling, reflection. This is not like other programs that you've seen, and we welcome you to take a look at our website. You can join for free, invite as many people as you like. We also support that with a community space where people can engage about this very important work. As you know, we're at a critical moment in America right now, and we're coming up on a year since the racial reckoning this summer, and now's the time to really step into action. So we're very excited today to have you joining us for Dignity and this Anti-Racism workshop. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Lynn for our land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to begin our time together acknowledging the land that we are occupying as a way to begin healing our relationships with Indigenous cultures and oppressed people. This land acknowledgement that I'm sharing with you today is inspired by Ruth King, who's an African-American mindfulness practitioner, and she inspires us every day. I would like to call on my ancestors to stand with me as I acknowledge the Native custodians of this land, Washington, D.C., the Anacostan land and the Piscataway people, those people that are named, unnamed, known, unknown, past and present. We honor all traditions and traditional custodians of this region, and we recognize their continued connection with this land, with this water, and with this community. We pay respect to the earth whose generous resources sustain us every day. And we pay respect to the enslaved African people of this land who were brought, held, and sold here, and all of their descendants, and all of the people throughout the world that are living in captivity. We pay respect to their spiritual labor. And we pay respect to our ancestors whose unwise relationship to race and racism we have inherited. We pay respect to our teachers and elders, past, present, and emerging, and to all of the young people today that are teaching us. We honor this gathering and everyone here, especially our guests, for taking the time out and energy to be with us today and to do this important work. May we recognize that we all share an aspiration for liberation to be free in heart, mind, and body. Ashe, here ends our land acknowledgement.
Thank you. Sorry, having a few technical issues. People were saying that they couldn't see the speaker, so I was just trying to fix that. Hopefully, please put it in the chat if you're having any issues. So right now, I would like to introduce our guest. Dr. Donna Hicks is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. She was deputy director of the program on international conflict analysis and resolution, also known as PICAR, at the Weatherhead Center for 10 years. She worked extensively on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and as a member of the third party in numerous unofficial diplomatic efforts. In addition to the Middle East, she has worked in Sri Lanka, Northern Ireland, Colombia, Libya, and has conducted several US-Cuba dialogues. She is the vice president of era Pacis, an Italian non-governmental conflict resolution organization that focuses on the human dimension of conflict. Dr. Hicks was a consultant to the BBC, where she co-facilitated encounters between victims and perpetrators of the Northern Irish conflict with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The encounters were made into 3 television programs, Facing the Truth, which were aired throughout the United Kingdom and on BBC World. Dr. Hicks has taught courses in conflict resolution at Harvard, Clark, and Columbia universities, and conducts trainings and educational seminars in the United States and abroad on the dignity model, on the role dignity plays, in healing and reconciling relationships in conflict. She conducts dignity leadership trainings in corporations, schools, churches, and non-governmental organizations. She is also the author of, I'm looking for my book, Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, published in 2011 by Yale University Press, which you must get if you don't have already. Her second book, Leading with Dignity, right there, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, was published by Yale University Press in 2018. We're also honored and thrilled to have Yemisi Oloruntola-Coates. She has 15 years of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or D&I. She has led D&I initiatives for large integrated health systems. She currently leads DEI at Bay State Health System as their Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Her responsibilities focus on the overall development and implementation of Bay State Health System's enterprise-wide diversity and inclusion strategic framework. This includes assessing the internal and external environment/culture and developing and implementing programs, culturally responsible care strategies, training, recruitment, and other methods to increase the organization's ability to attract and retain an inclusive population that serves their diverse patients, employees, and community. One of the models of training and technique that she has successfully implemented is the dignity model by Dr. Donna Hicks. And this model helped units and departments that were struggling with the inclusive behaviors, and later was adopted into the Bay State Health Platform. In addition, as a result of the brutal death of George Floyd, she created and developed the Elevating Dignity Education series in response to systemic and racial injustices which have been offered within Bay State and the community. The response and impact has led to operationalizing dignity into leadership practices, policies, and procedures, and created a safe and brave space to speak openly regarding injustices and systemic racism. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our esteemed guests. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited for this workshop and cannot wait to dig in on dignity.
I'm trying to undo the video. There we go. Shoot. All right, wait a second. Yay. Oh, that's momentary.
All right, welcome.
Yeah.
Did I get it? No.
We don't see you
You're
yet.
like playing peekaboo with us. We saw you for a
Sorry,
minute.
wait a second. For some reason, I'm having a little technical difficulty starting my video.
There you are. We see you.
It keeps going off though. Hold on. Sorry, folks. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Just we'll hang tight while you get that
Have a
sorted
sip of
out.
water, drink your tea.
Yeah.
For a
Let me
minute.
just try this one more. It just, the second that it goes on, it goes off. I don't know what to say, folks. I'm terribly sorry, but maybe I should just start talking because.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
There,
Okay, we
I'm
can
not
see
gonna
it.
touch it
We're
again.
good.
I'm not gonna touch it. All right, well, thank you so much, Kirsten and Lynn, for this opportunity to work with you on your remarkable program anti-racist table. I encourage everybody to go on their website and take a look. They have put their heart and soul into this program, and it's a great pleasure being here with you too, with both of you, and not to mention the pleasure of having my friend and colleague Yemisi here with me to show you the nuts and bolts of how she puts dignity into her DEI work. And I've never seen anything like it, honestly. I mean, I've been struggling over the years to figure out how to do this, but Yemisi has done something that, I mean, she's a rock star. We all consider her our resident rock star here. So yeah. So I'm not going to say too much because I want to give her all the time. I just want to say a couple of things about dignity that, you know, I think when I discovered dignity and I discovered the role it was playing in these conflicts that I was working on all over the world, it was like something hit me like a bolt of lightning, that these, you know, people react in such predictable ways when their dignity is being assaulted, when they're not being seen as, you know, human beings, when they're treated as if they don't even matter. And I had to figure out a way to talk about this. I had to figure out a way to bring this into these high intensity negotiations and conversations. And very long story short, the story is in that first book that Kirsten pointed out, but a very long story short is that once I figured out that what was causing such pain and human suffering, not the politics, but the human suffering, it was this issue of dignity and how strongly people react when their dignity is not being recognized. It was everywhere. It was the Middle East, it was Asia, it was Africa, it was Europe, it was everywhere. And then I realized, oh my goodness, this is something that is not just an international conflict issue. This is about being a human being. All of us, I discovered, you know, years passed beyond this, publishing that first book. It hit a nerve in healthcare. It hit a nerve in the corporate world. It hit a nerve in all of these venues and in the workplace, certainly. So I created a language for which we could, you know, really discuss these profound assaults to our dignity. And I am just thrilled that we are able to shed light on structural racism now using the language of dignity, because it's so easy for people to see. Yemisi will show you, and it takes down the barriers, it takes down the resistance. And I just think this is probably some of the most important work that the dignity model is doing around how to create an anti-racist America and world, for that matter, not just here, for everywhere. So I'm, let's see, there was one other thing that I wanted to share, just one other small thing, and that is that this dignity issue isn't just about being nice. You know, people say to me, I go into the corporate world and they say to me, oh yeah, Donna, this is just nice, touchy-feely stuff. To them, this is way more than just being nice. Being nice is important, don't get me wrong, but there is neuroscience behind this understanding of dignity. And that is that our brains experience dignity violations, wounds and assaults to our dignity in the same way that the brain reacts to a physical injury. So this stuff is real. And if we say we do no harm, it's not just physical harm. Harm to our dignity has created so much human suffering, and it usually goes unaddressed. That's the tragedy of this. So no matter where you are, no matter whether you're in the corporate setting or healthcare or in education, in schools, in communities, wherever people congregate, you'll find dignity issues. And at the structural level, when you look at racism and you see the indignities that people have suffered over the years, centuries, around this issue of unrecognized dignity, it's time. Our time is now. Our time is now. And
Yes, amen.
yeah. And Yemisi is going to walk us through it. So turn it over to you,
All
Yemisi.
right, thank you. Awesome, we're excited.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donna Hicks. I know she doesn't like when I say doctor, but this is just an exciting opportunity. I was fortunate and blessed to meet her a couple of months ago. Now that I'm in Massachusetts, and I've been doing this work for so long, and I did not think she would oblige. I thought she would be too busy and not even respond to the email, but she did. And we met, and she's had an opportunity to meet her dignity champions at Bay State. She has quite a few followers. And I'm going to talk to you about how I've incorporated DEI and show you how I've used her book, particularly Leading with Dignity, as one of my training tools. So I'm going to walk you through it and show you all how we built equity space around dignity as a foundation. So I'm going to share my slide. So first, as we're talking today about elevating dignity as a path to anti-racism, I want to talk about the 4 pandemics that we're dealing with briefly. We have COVID-19, we have racial injustice, we have economic, we have education. And really, if we think about it, race has impacted every single one of those quadrants. And so just as the famous movie that was taped and is a true story in Massachusetts, it is the perfect storm. What happened, the death and the killing of George Floyd, it's not the first time it happened, but it's the first time that the world was on a pause, where all of us were in front of our TV or in front of our phones, in front of our internet, because we've been home for months, and we all watched in horror, not only in the United States, because the world was on pause. And the whole world watched in horror what happened to his dignity, right? And they watched as he yelled and said, my mom, calling after his mom. And still we watched no attention to his dignity. And so as we think about those aspects of that, I wanted to share this quick video, and Dr. Donna Hicks talks about what she shared in terms of the injustices and things we need to look into. So this is a quick video that's going to encapsulate everything that she shared with you. Make sure. Oh. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. Hold on for 1 second as I try. If I don't, you will get it via, here you go.
Can you turn the volume up on it?
Okay, no audio. There's no audio?
No, there's no audio.
Let me,
If we can restart it.
yes, I'm gonna restart it
Okay.
and see, optimize, share sound. Okay, I see it.
You got
Hopefully
it?
this will work.
Perfect.
All I want with inverted tongue, from whence does fulfillment come? When I expel from this mortal shell, will I die for living up? fulfillment.
Okay. So when she said the time is now, Dr. Donna Hicks said the time is now, and the time is we do have a choice. So what is that choice? Well, as we go into this, I want to share with you how the dignity model affected a manager at Bay State. So we're going to go through a little bit of exercise. And if you can, I'm going to ask you some questions and I want you to put it in the chat. And so what would you do? This is a true story. This happened in June of last year. So after the killing of George Floyd, you notice that there is a Black Lives Matter poster hanging in the communal area. Your employee that put it up informs you that they did it in order for you to notice. Why do you think the employee put it up for the manager to notice? If you could put it in the chat. Because they felt unseen or unheard. Emily said, encouraging the manager to hear the message. Jennifer said to put some action into it because he does not behave appropriately. May seem oblivious. Very true. The employee feels that they're not being seen and that they do not matter to the manager. Excellent, excellent response. Now, what message, you kind of answered that in terms of what message you think the employee was trying to convey. So some of you are saying, be visible, be viable, be valuable. I like those 3 V's. Might have felt not powered, need to be acknowledged. I love that you said acknowledged. Hold on to those parts because they're in pain and wanted to be seen and heard. Now, what would you do if you were in this manager? How would you respond? Open a dialogue, Vanessa, yeah. Please tell me more, pull up a chair, open up of a conversation, listen, ask questions, excellent. Very, very good. So a lot of you asked for more, absolutely, Kate, yes. And then thank them, I would agree, talk with them, have a community chat dialogue. So excellent. Well, let me tell you what really happened. So this manager, at the time, within our facility, we cannot put posters up because of unionization. So we do have a policy as it relates to putting things up that are not organizationally branded. And so at the time when the employee, my CEO at the time, sent a message out to the whole organization, so did I, in response to George Floyd. And we gave toolkits and different things in terms of how to have this discussion with your teams. And when he went to the HR business partner, he went to compliance, and he really focused on what I would call policy, not the person, okay? So he was focused on, okay, we can't put that flyer up, policy. So as he circled around, HR BP, which is HR business partner, said, have you spoken to Yemisi yet? And he's like, no, I haven't. So we had this meeting and we sat down and discussed this situation. And I asked him a couple of questions. And I said, well, when the message was out, when the toolkit was sent, did you have a conversation about what occurred with George Floyd, what happened, death and the killing, and the message? He said, no. I said, did you discuss it with your team? He said, no, I did not. And I said, okay, what have you noticed with this employee, a change in behavior? He said, yeah, she was coming in late. She didn't seem like herself. I said, well, how was she a few weeks ago? Oh, she was great. I hired her. She's a fantastic employee, but I noticed a shift in behavior. I said, okay. And then he said, you know what? I noticed that she really wanted to talk to me, but I didn't feel comfortable talking to her. And this is what he said. He said, I am just a white male from Pittsfield, and I didn't know how to talk to her. And so I pulled out the dignity model. I said, here's an example of how you can talk to her. And so we went through each 10 essential elements of dignity, which you'll see after this slide. And as I'm sharing with him what I think that employee needed, which one of you wrote in the chat, is acknowledgement. To acknowledge what she was dealing with and feeling, because she was showing that. But he didn't take the time at that moment to talk to her because he didn't feel equipped. So as we're going through the dignity model, and one of the aspects of the dignity model is righting the wrong. And he's like, Yemisi, going through each piece, the responsiveness, which I'm going to share more in greater detail as we go through the next slide. He said, can I go to her and apologize? I recognize that I didn't respond. I recognize I did not acknowledge, and I recognize that I didn't accept her identity because she was a woman of color. And she was being impacted by the visuals, not only with COVID, but you're talking about what we saw on TV. And he went back to her. And with that, he studied the dignity model. He got the book, Leading with Dignity. He went and spoke to her and apologized. He apologized for his behavior and recognized what she needed was that acknowledgement, and recognized he did not respond, and recognized that he did not acknowledge her own dignity and how this was impacting her. He then comes back to me and sends me the most beautiful email and says that in all his years of work, that he never, because he was more of a technical person and into job, and the other aspect of work, the emotional intelligence piece, was not what he knew to do. And so he was not equipped, but the dignity model gave him that equipment or that language and that tool to show his emotional intelligence towards that employee. And he said that in all his years of working, he had the most profound conversation at work centered around race. Where a few days ago, he said, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. But the beauty was he acknowledged and he said, I was wrong with how I responded. The policy went away. Guess what? She pulled the sign down because we do have a policy, but their relationship improved because he focused on the person. When we could deal with the person within our workspaces, you have less problems with policy, because the point is around acknowledging the dignity of everyone. But the beauty was in our interaction, he later became my champion and started doing trainings with me around this piece. He said what he appreciated in the session was I wasn't beating him down that he doesn't know what he's doing or making him feel horrible and terrible, because he was in a state of, I don't know what to do. And I need help. I need to understand why this is so, why is this bothering her? Why is this so impactful? How do I respond to her need? And the dignity model allowed him to also have his own dignity and how he was exchanged and how he was discussed with, and understanding the process, because it's like a dignity exchange. When he went and apologized, as Dr. Donna Hicks says, you also retain your dignity, not just giving the dignity back, but you retain yours. And it improved the relationship he had, not only with the individual, but also with his team. And so as we go through, as you're going through the elevating dignity as a path to anti-racism, exclusive, we already know that is someone who sees exclusivity and doesn't see the inclusion, the diversity and equity as a part of strategy, as a part of structure, or as part of harmony. And then you have passive, you see it, but you're not that invested. Then you have symbolic change, which is you may make statements on your websites and your platform, but you're really not doing anything internally. And so that's more performative rather than authentic. And then you have an identity change, which is what he went through, where he realized, oh my gosh, there's aspects of myself that I need to evaluate And how is that showing up within my work? And how is that showing up in which how I lead? And then the structural change. Now you take the individual and you make changes to policy. And I'm going to show you some of the things we made changes structurally, which then leads to an inclusive, viable, anti-racist organization. And you can achieve this through dignity. Dr. Donna Hicks says, all human beings have a profound desire to be treated with dignity is part of our evolutionary inheritance, the need to be seen in a favorable light. What I loved about dignity and why I've been doing this work with Dignity Model for so long is it is a foundational language in which every single person on this call desires dignity, desires to be seen in a favorable light. But what it also does, it helps us to recognize that there are some that do not. So it becomes a shared opportunity in making that systemic structural change. And so she has these 10 elements of dignity, which I'm going to go through them with you. And so the first one, before I go through that, I really want to, this was where it really hit home for me when I started reading her work, is the difference between respect and dignity. Because people use respect inappropriately. And honestly, I like to say respect has lost its potency. It's almost like walking through the streets of New York City and you see a piece of tissue on the sidewalk and you just walk past it. We don't pay attention. And if we think about respect, it is based on what I do for you. So it's showing admiration. So if you like what I do, if you like how I perform and the qualities, then I earn your respect. What is the beauty about dignity, as it says here, is to be worthy, is to be worthy. And so all people have the right to be recognized for their inherent humanity. Dignity is a given. And so when I started studying this and seeing this from the Dr. Donna Hicks model around the difference between respect and dignity, it really helped me to understand that that is the approach from a diversity, equity, inclusion that we need to take. So these are the 10 essential elements. First one, acceptance of identity. First thing you need to do when you want to honor people's dignity is to accept that they're neither inferior nor superior to you. By virtue of being a human being, we all have the same inherent worth and value. What I love about this is that it is your obligation to humanity to accept them as your spiritual equals and do them no harm. In medicine, we say that. Our role is to make sure as soon as you come into our facilities to do you no harm. That is an ethic, that's an oath that physicians and nurses and clinicians take to do you no harm. But this takes it on a whole nother level because she says, no matter what your orientation, no matter what your race, no matter what package you come into this earth, I need to accept you as your spirit, as my spiritual equal and do you no harm. Also inclusion, she says, no one likes to be feel left out. Even as simple as being left out of a meeting or an email, and then that person starts thinking, what about me that I'm not included? There's an instant reaction, as she says, of self-doubt. And this is the feeling of inclusion, where you have the people out on the streets and their voices being heard because they have not been included in the process. They have not been included in their words and the policies and the practices and the organizations. And so they're saying, hey, see me. I am of value. I am of worth. Acknowledgement. People like to feel like they matter, right? And not only acknowledgement is also the aspect of acknowledging the pain or the discomfort that we have placed on people. And so oftentimes we tend to save face, like she says, and that diminishes what the situation or the emotion or the process or the lived experience that the individual is going through. Safety. There are two kinds of safety. We all know about physical, but what I love is the psychological, which we cannot see. And I tell you, working in healthcare, particularly now, this has reared its ugly head not only within us in healthcare, but across the country, where mental health and the challenges and the constant stress of what we see, the dignity infractions that Dr. Donna Hicks loves to say is wearing on us. It's wearing on us mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so one of the things is, humiliation, diminishing, hurtfully criticizing, but not limited to violations that are public. Then fairness. We all have a knee-jerk reaction to being treated unfairly, understanding. There's nothing more frustrating than being misunderstood. And a lot of times, I think with the Black Lives Matter, there's been some misunderstanding because of the historical context of why that has been able to be built and developed. There's a whole history behind that has been silenced. And I talk about that down in the presentation. Freedom, the freedom to live our authentic selves. I think about how during the time of after George Floyd, I told my husband and my son, who's just 7, I said, go to the police station and identify who you are and say, we live here. Why should my 7-year-old son have to go to a police station? Because my fear as a mom is that when I live in a pretty, nice neighborhood, but I'm afraid that if he's outside playing in the yard, that someone will say he doesn't belong here. So the freedom to be my authentic self within my own skin and not have to worry about my children or myself. Benefit of the doubt. Treating people as though they're trustworthy, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're acting in good intention. With that manager, he was acting in good intention, but it was still hurtful, right? It was still hurtful to the person. But what was great was he understood the impact that the dignity model would have, not only on him, also on his way he leads. Right. And then when you think about the benefit of doubt for that employee, she gave him the benefit of doubt because she accepted his apology and his acknowledgement and was able to heal forward. I said this in another session that Dr. Donna Hicks did for us at Bay State. I said, people always talk about moving forward. No, it's like almost like you're ignoring the infractions in the past. We have to acknowledge the pain and the suffering and the wound and heal forward. Because the wound has been there for over 400 years, but we can heal forward by using dignity as our platform. And my favorite, righting the wrong. When we violate someone's dignity, it is important to take responsibility and apologize for the hurt that we've caused because you regain your own dignity. And so those are the 10 essential elements. And when we go in, this is what he used. He used acknowledgement. He acknowledged her pain, her discomfort as a person of color, and what that death and killing of George Floyd did to her. He responded by going back to her and telling her that he got it wrong and that he should have stopped and listened to her and talked to her, but he wasn't equipped. He said, I didn't understand or know. And it's through the dignity model that I understood the lens in which that you were impacted, but it also helped me to understand some of my own biases that I have within myself. And he took accountability. He said, I'm sorry. You see, that is powerful that he said, I was sorry, I was wrong. That helped him and her and the team to heal forward. And so when we think about the analysis on race in America, this was a Pew study this was done in 2019. And so I find it interesting if they were to do it in 2021, I'm sure the numbers would be off kilter. But it says, most say it's now more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views, okay? So 65% more common, 45% acceptable, right? Then white and Blacks differ widely in views of how Blacks are treated. So you can see the differences. I think this has changed. As I said, this is 2019. I can't wait till the Pew does this after 2019 with the 2020, 2021 in terms of this difference. I think we're now merging in terms of understanding dealing with the police, the criminal justice system, the hiring and pay, we were very far ahead. And the reason why it wasn't as connected is because of the lived experiences are very different. And part of dignity is trying to understand what those lived experiences and those challenges are from a historical and current contemporary issue. And so when we think about stress in America, oh my gosh, this was done in 2020. You know, it gives I've been seeing a lot of stress within my organization, also within my communities that I serve. And then amongst people of color, 44% report discrimination as a significant stressor in their life compared to 38%. So it's increased from 2019. Black Americans are more likely to report discrimination as a stressor at 48%, Latinx 43, Native American 42, Asian 41, 25% white. But also out of everyone, majority of adults, regardless of race, ethnicity, report significant stress regarding race and systemic racism compared to 2016, which was at 36%. What a huge jump. So this is the time. The time is now to really use this model in a way that will advance your diversity, equity, inclusion. See, what happens is with diversity is the people, the inclusion is the voice, but we need to get to the impact. We need to get to the equity. We need to make changes in our practices. We need to make changes in our policies. We need to make changes in our hiring. We need to make changes in our educational curriculum. This is where we will have true impact, is in this bucket. But you need diversity and inclusion in order to have an equity in order to have impact. And so what I'm going to show you, this is an exercise that Dr. Donna Hicks did in one of your videos. And I love this video, this piece, when you look at this baby boy, what do you see? Just put in the chat. What do you see? What automatically comes out? Adorable, cute, soft, warm, precious, huggable, vulnerable. I love that, vulnerable. Let's keep that. Sweetie pie, hope, God sent, amazing, innocent, cute as a lamb, excellent. Well, this was my son at literally 5 days old. We did a photo shoot. I used to live in Florida, and we did a photo shoot, and I used to live in Cape Coral, and we did a photo shoot in my lanai. But you know what's beautiful? Just as you see this and you said that about him now, and Dr. Donna Hicks says, we're born with dignity, right? She said, you can't look at a child and not see their value. We see them as invaluable. We see them as priceless. We see them as irreplaceable. But what happens when this 5-day-old boy becomes a 21-year-old man, a 16-year-old boy, 13-year-old boy, 15-year-old boy, 25-year-old boy, man, 30-something-year-old man? I'm calling ages of people who have Black boys within this country who have been killed because this innocence change over time. So even though we're born with being worthy, we are also born vulnerable. And I love how someone put that in the chat. Vulnerable to having our dignity violated. So treating others like with dignity, as she says, as being invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable, just as we had those feelings for this little boy, this picture, why can't we have those same feelings for each other as a shared humanity? And so one of the things when we think about that, we have to think about when we're talking about elevating dignity from an anti-racism standpoint, we need to think about our individual contribution, our interpersonal, and then we need to think about systemic, institutional, and structural. Now I deal with all quadrants, but the part that I love to work in is in the systemic. What I don't want to be at a place where 5 years from now, I want to see change. I want to see difference. I want to see action. So how do we do that? Well, first, you got to take these 3 principles: acceptance of identity, acknowledgement, and inclusion. So these are the three essential elements I'm pulling out from the dignity model. And so I'm going to give you an example. Everybody knows about the light bulb, but who created the light bulb? This is something we use every day. But who was the creator of the light bulb? If you could put it in the chat. A fourth grader, yes. Ben Franklin, okay. Keep going. But I'm sorry, you don't remember. Thomas Edison, yep, it was not Thomas. Most of you would say Edison, a Black member, you don't remember. All of this, very good, I'm glad. Tesla, no, not Tesla. But absolutely, all of these points. But this is amazing that a Black member, I don't know his name, but we all know Thomas Edison. And in fact, in Southwest Florida, they have a Thomas Edison museum, and they turned his house into a museum. But you are absolutely correct. Lewis Howard Latimer was an African-American, actually he's from Massachusetts, was an American inventor, and he actually created the filament that is within the light bulb. He improved Thomas Edison's original invention, which caused all of us help to make widespread use of electric light in public and at home. But no one here knew his name. Because why? It's silent history. So imagine a kid going to school, a person of color, and they only know Thomas Edison. They don't know about the contributions that they have made. That is why the inequity from a structural and systemic around our education. There's more. Do any of you know who this person is? Yes, Humphrey, yeah. No, some of you are saying no. Well, what if I tell you that he's the one that helped with refrigeration? This is an American inventor who pioneered the modern refrigeration system, now used for vaccine and blood transport. He made more than he had 60 patents, and also including one of them was a portable X-ray machine. And after he died, he became the first African-American to receive the National Medal of Technology. Something that we use every day, but none of us knows who he is. Then, do you know this person? If you can write in the chat. No. I'm seeing a lot of no. This person is actually Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. She's a viral immunologist at the Vaccine Research Center at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and is the lead scientist for developing the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. But you all know Dr. Fauci, right? But you don't know her. So this is a problem. Part of dignity is acknowledgement. We need to acknowledge that our history is skewed. We need to acknowledge that our history is missing important pieces to the identity of American history. We need to also accept the identities of these individuals, that they're neither inferior or superior to you. We also need to include their voices in everything that we do. That is how you will be elevating their dignity and elevating the dignity of BIPOC and POCs, but also you'll be elevating your dignity, because this is not Black history. This is American history. And part of that, in order to move to anti-racism, is we need to elevate the dignity of these voices. And so when we talk about that, we need to know our history. But one of the things that Dr. Donna Hicks says is, why is it so challenging to honor people's dignity? I love this quote of Buddha quote, it says, all wrongdoings arises because of mind. If mind is transformed, can wrongdoing remain? So one of the things that we need to work on is we're all born with bias, okay? And if you say, I always say that if you said that you are not biased, I'm very scared of you, because that is an inherent lie. Every single one of us is biased, okay? All of us. However, we need to understand that some of our bias has really bad infractions and barriers that has impact on people's jobs, that has impact on people's policies and practices and processes. And so we need to remove the shame at admitting that we do have them, because we tend to say, oh, for self-preservation. And one of the things that I moving to the back to the Northeast, someone said to me that progressive liberals are the worst because they don't even recognize that they do have bias or have racist tendencies or racist legacies because they're in a more progressive area. Whereas, I came from the South, it's pretty much, if someone has a thought, they say it. It really doesn't matter whether on one side or the other, plain where they are. But what I've seen is the transformation of individuals. And there's a great documentary called Unlikely Friendship, in which the Grand Dragon of the KKK and a civil rights activist become best friends. The reason why is she acknowledged his dignity, even though she did not want to. And in her behavior, he recognized, wow, what am I doing wrong? Why didn't she shame me, humiliate me? Because he put his KKK information all over the wall, and these kids wanted to tear it down. And she said, don't tear it down. You will never know about a person's history unless you read. And he was shocked. He expected a different response, and it changed his view around her. And so when we think about these things, we need to plant the right seeds. One of the things is by 5 key conditions. Our biases are either because we tend to view people who look or think like us more favorably than people who don't or are different. Expedience. We tend to rush to conclusions in an effort to minimize cognitive effort. Experience. We tend to believe that how we see the world is inherently truer than someone else's. Distance. We tend to assign greater value to those things that we perceive to be close to us rather than further away. And safety. The tendency to over account for negative outcomes instead of positive ones. And so, I would say plant the right seeds. Using the dignity model as your framework is planting the right seeds. And so one of the things that I always like to share is, prior to me working in healthcare and DI, I actually used to live and work in Japan. And at the time, I had chosen Kyoto, Tokyo, and Osaka, because I did not want to live in the rural part of Japan, because I assumed that that person or the people there would not accept me. And so at the time when I applied, they gave me Wani, which is in Shiga Prefecture. And I said, oh my gosh, I had my own bias because it was, the school was on top of Mount Hirai. It was a rural part of Japan, and monkeys used to invade the school. Lake Biwako was the largest lake in Japan, and they were fishing, farming. They raised rice, best tasting rice I ever tasted in my life. But I said, this is not going to work. They too saw my picture. Now, mind you, I went through this year-long process. I mean, it was like applying for a CIA job. And, I had to have certain GPA and all. I passed with flying colors, but then they see my picture and they said, she's not going to work. But the beauty is, there I am. Of course, you could find me smack in the middle. And they called me O Sensei because my name is just way too long. And the boy, the young man next to me, his name is Kengo Takayama. One day he came to me in the teacher's lounge and he said, oh, Sensei, I looked up the word black in the dictionary and it said dark, gloomy, and evil. And then he said, but that's not you. You're a ray of sunshine. he was 12. So I'm pushing back tears. I'm in rural Japan talking to a 12-year-old about the difference between the word and me as a person. He later wrote an essay that how his interaction with me made him now want to see the world. He didn't know that in his conversation with me, he acknowledged me. He accepted my identity. He included me. He actually had dignity in every interaction in our conversation. But what if I would have said no to the job? That wouldn't have never happened. What if they would have said no to me? That would have never happened. So what are you doing in your workplaces, with your teams? How are you planting the right seeds? Are you including the voices of the people that are voiceless at times? Are you opening those pathways and those doors? Because if you do, you may have a Kengo Takayama moment within your own spaces and your own organizations. And so one of the things that dignity does, it reduces competition and it creates cooperation. This is actually a study where creating intergroup cooperation actually increases empathy. So when you have these dialogue, which can be kind of tough and sticky, but the dignity model allows us an opportunity to have them in a safe space. Then also showing people, it also helps with increasing social networks, which again increases empathy, which again increases dignity. Here you have one vision, one image where they're kind of separated. On the other side, you have everyone interconnected working together. And so it's not about a zero-sum game, it's about how do we all win together. And so you have to explore your ugly. You know, part of leading with dignity is your ugly truth. You know, your fears, your challenges, your biases. Are you planting the right seeds? What you think of yourself may not be how other people experience you. And your technical ability does not equal leadership ability. So you need to flex your dignity muscle. You need to work on your own, that model, read it, digest it, operational. I'm going to show you some examples of operationalizing it. Be curious. Look for opportunities to expand your knowledge. Look for opportunities to recognize the more you know, the more you will see that you don't know. Eliminate failure. You're going to make mistakes. Oftentimes I find, particularly my white brothers and sisters, they say, I'm afraid to talk. I don't want to say the wrong thing. You know what? That's the part of it. It's okay. That was what the manager went through. He said, I was afraid, but then this dignity model gives the language to be able to be bolder, to have conversations in a safe place, in a brave way. And, you know, dignity, it will help develop your dignity consciousness. Dr. Donna Hicks always says this, because dignity is when my conscious recognizes what is the right thing to do. And with the dignity model, you would recognize that. And it starts with you. It starts with you. The responsibility starts with you. So in order for you to build your dignity consciousness, you have to build your character equity. So I love what Dr. Martin Luther King says. He says the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. So practice and application creates wins. So if we dedicate as much time, the fraction of time of educating ourselves about dignity and immersing yourself on true history of BIPOC, you would improve your dignity consciousness. And to honor dignity, you must practice it daily. That is how you will become anti-racist. You need to increase your dignity consciousness. And so how do we do that? How do we raise our dignity consciousness? How do we pull each other forward? Well, first of all, is structural racism is a public health crisis. The state of Massachusetts and other states says so. And so you have people looking at structural racism from a completely different lens. And, you know, Mahatma Gandhi says, our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization. We are in our test right now. And so how do we do that? Well, I'm going to share with you some aspects briefly going through, because I want to give time for Q&A. As I said, it was introduced to the dignity model in 2010, and I used it at Lee Health. And I used it with intact teams and developed it as part of my dignity coaching, diversity coaching. Then what we did was outwardly much larger. We worked on a campaign because our human services budget was underfunded. And so using dignity as a model and a framework where obviously we all know where communities have lower property taxes, their schools tend to be not that great, right? They lack funding. So part of this was a campaign to increase funding, which if we lift up one community, we lift up all communities. And so that was called Pennies for Community Progress. And this was actually the time when I was in campaign mode and using dignity as a model for how we need to approach this within our communities. And so that was another aspect. And here are some of the pieces of how it was used in Bay State. Started using it with teams that were performing low around engagement and their productivity. These teams went through a year-long process around dignity change management. And I'm here to tell you today that these teams not only are more engaged, but more productive, and their patient care also has improved because they started working on communicating better with each other, which then had a tentacle effect in how they operated. Also, we incorporated into our International Nurse Integration Program. This is a global recruitment. We have Dignity Fridays. One of our Dignity champions writes a message every Friday that goes out highlighting each element and giving examples of how to operationalize and actualize it. I use the dignity model in my coaching sessions, particularly when I'm dealing with things that are challenging around race, LGBTQ. Primarily, those are the two functions that I've used it on. And I tell you, the transformation that I see within these spaces is quite unreal. The dignity model, I'm on the COVID-19 mitigation group. We've been using the dignity model as a way of reaching particularly those who have been in those communities that have been underserved. And our clinicians are talking about how do we engage them? How do we acknowledge? How do we accept identity? How do we respond through a dignity lens? We started a safety reporting system called Insult to Employees Dignity, where if an employee is experiencing an insult to their dignity, they actually report it into the system. And we have a process and a policy on how to manage and deal with that. And then again, language, we use a dignity lens when developing processes and procedures. So part of that is the dignity coaching. This is an example I wanted to show. When I'm dealing with intact teams, particularly virtually, I look at their data points. So I look at their employee engagement scores. I look at their patient satisfaction scores, and I literally pull out themes and tie them back to the 10 essential elements of dignity. So for example, if I see that there are people are saying that now no one is taking accountability, acknowledgement, all of those pieces. So I pull those different pieces. And this is an example of righting the wrong. We go over what righting the wrong is and how we need to actualize it from a dignity lens. And I take them through an exercise what happens when righting the wrong doesn't work? What does the team looks like? What is the behavior? And then what happens when it does? Using the dignity model. And what happens is they go through this mental exercise about where they were, and they go through the exercise of where they should be. And they're seeing it, it's being typed, they're seeing it. And then I say, we're holding you accountable for the blue. The red is where we were before. How we heal forward is in the blue. So this is one of those different exercises that I'm showing. Another thing in terms of dismantling structural and institutional racism, we started a structural inclusion committee. And here we have a committee that looks at policies, practices, and processes and algorithms. This is a cross-functional team so that we can remove systemic barriers, ensure bias-free decision-making, and purposely build equity across the entire enterprise. You know, we are the vaccine. Racism is a virus. And so one of the things we did is we created a policy. Some of our employees were suffering in silence, where their dignity was being infracted on. And so we created this, as I mentioned, the insult to employees' dignity. We launched a policy around appropriate management of patient bias. And this is the swim lane. And we use dignity language on how we have talking points for our leaders. And this was part of the policy in terms of how to manage patient bias when it happens. Then we added the dignity language into our BH platform. So it's honoring the dignity of all people. So we replaced respect to say honoring dignity of all people and inculcated the language within our platform. And then of course, valuing differences, courage, and lifelong learning were some of those values and core competencies. Then when George Floyd hit, you mentioned earlier, Kristen, we said elevating the D. So we started an Elevating Dignity education series. So using Dr. Donna Hicks, Leading with Dignity, what managers can do right now, elevating dignity, the power of dignity in the workplace. We held dignity cafes where we took the 10 essential elements and created little mini sessions. So we had a mini session of acknowledgement, a mini session of acceptance of identities, a mini session of inclusion, and managers and leaders talked about how to operationalize that within their workspace. Shifting the narrative, let's talk about race. Again, dignity model is in there as the framework of how we shift the narrative, how to be a workplace ally and ambassador for change. Dignity model, again, the framework we use. Race fatigue, learn and understand the impact that racially charged experience has on people of color. Again, dignity model, inculcated into the training. And we always said elevating the D, we put it in different various spaces so that people know what the classes are about. We've been doing these classes since June, quite popular. And the transformation in terms of using the dignity model as the framework has been quite incredible. And this is our DEI, Elevating Dignity, How You Can Lead. This is our DEI strategic plan. And so, you know, the main thing is you don't talk, just act. Don't say, just show. Don't promise, just prove, because your actions are remembered long after your words are forgotten. And so one of the things that we say is when we elevate dignity for one, we elevate the dignity for all. And so when we think about, because oftentimes people think, oh, why are we giving preferential treatment to one group? No, that is not what we're doing. What we're doing is recognizing that their dignity needs to be elevated because it has not been acknowledged. And so when we think about the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, I always use this as an example. We have wider doors. So here we're talking about a specific community, those that fall under ADA, and now we have wider doors. You mean to tell me none of you on this call have benefited from wider doors? Maybe you have a stroller, or maybe you have a cart. So those wider doors have been beneficial. Buttons to open the doors. You mean to tell me none of you on this call have never used the handicap button because maybe you have a lot of bags or stroller, or during COVID, I have seen people who are touching those buttons way more now because they don't want to hold their handle. What about wider walkways and streets? I see families able to walk together with the stroller all together, or more walkways. In the past, we didn't have them. Leveling of counter spaces. Also employment opportunities, especially if something happened or to you or your loved one, you still have the opportunity to work. So here was an act, a legal law that benefited one group, but every single one of us had benefited as well. And so we need to look at it again on how we're going to make this change systemically and recognize in order to elevating dignity, we need to get through these changes to become fully inclusive, to be anti-racist. We need to think about the structural change, the identity change, the symbolic change, and get past the passive and the exclusive, because we are building a house. And so I like to call myself an inclusion architect, that I'm usually I'm modeling, like I used to work at an architectural firm and I used to be so impressed by how they drew things and then they create a model, but they're not the builders. There's several hundreds people that will build the house. And so we need every single one of you in order to make that change, in order to build that house. that is anti-racist and that elevates dignity for all. Thank you so much for your time. And I went through it kind of fast, so I wanted to give time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Yemisi. We have Angela has raised her hand. Let's see. I'm not sure how to answer a hand raise. Can you put your question in the chat, Angela, please? Let's see if we have any other questions. Well, while we're waiting for that, I was wondering if you could give us a few examples of, on the Elevating Dignity education series, what some of those would look like.
Yeah, well, you know, we are virtual. So all of that was done virtually. First, we had a major Elevating Dignity event. We had over 500 people, no, about, is it 700 of our employees attend a virtual event. And what we did was we took out 5 elements of Dr. Donna Hicks' 10 Essential, and I had people tell stories. So they told stories about acceptance of identity. They told stories about being included. They told stories about freedom. They told stories about responsiveness. It was quite powerful because these employees were able to share their stories of whether they needed to learn to do something differently or what they've experienced personally. And it really opened the door where people started asking, sharing their stories in a brave, safe space and sharing things that they would like to see. And I mean, you had tears, there were, you know, laughter, but there was also this healing process during that time. And so out of that Elevating Dignity, we took all the information and then developed these curriculum. Now, the curriculum that we developed, I'm going to tell you, this was done through our office in partnership. So we didn't do a canned curriculum. I am old school in a sense of I prefer to use things that is needed for the moment, and sometimes canned DEI presentations doesn't really always have all the elements that is required and needed. And I wanted to make sure that the dignity model was infused. So as you went through each session, you're literally learning and growing through dignity. That was a design of the curriculum.
Great, thank you. I think we have some questions come through. So I'll just start with this. How many employees are employed at baseline? In perspective?
Yes, we have 12,000 employees at Bay State. And did I receive pockets of pushback? I think whenever you do, I think Lisa, yes, whenever you do DEI work, you're always going to get some level of pushback. But the beauty of it was the people wanted it. So I started off grassroots, and then people in their experience with the dignity model started articulating their desire because it connected every single one. And so it's like something that's irrefutable. That's the best way I can say, where no one can fight against dignity, you know, you really can't. And so it was like an irrefutable message. And so I was able to take that energy and operationalize it within the DEI work.
That's really helpful hearing that. There was a question about where do you suggest we begin? I teach in, I'm not sure if that's Boston. I teach in BSN students, nursing students. I'm not sure what the acronym is.
Yeah, that's nursing students.
Okay, yeah. Where do I begin adding this education? I also have that question generally for people who, you know, maybe this is their first introduction to dignity and the dignity model. Where do you recommend they start with this work?
Yeah, with dignity, I include dignity with the BSN students, with the nursing students. I would use it in cultural responsive strategies. So I have a class that I do nursing orientation. I actually use the dignity model there too. And I use it in everything I do. It's in everything I do. And so in cultural responsive strategies, because you probably teach about cultural competence, I don't really like that word because competence states that you know everything about a culture, and none of us do. So culture responsive is, how do we respond when a patient is expressing certain things? That is part of dignity. And so that is how I've used that in the training module. So there's a lot of examples, and I can share that with Kristen in terms of how I've been able to use that in that space.
So, you know, one thing you just said about it's in everything you do. And in my mind, what went off was mindfulness, how I feel like when you study and you adopt meditation and mindfulness, it has that same kind of correlation and applies to everything. So I feel like that's an exciting insight. There's a question here. How would you suggest I talk to other white people who claim they have no biases, but then say things that are implicitly racist and degrading to BIPOC? I know it's important to remain friendly and calm, but I struggle sometimes. I have the same problem with bias against trans people.
I can answer that, but I wanted to see what Dr. Donna Hicks wanted to answer too.
Dr. Hicks, you're on mute.
No, I just said, I want you to answer that. That's one of a key question. I am like here in the background. This is yours, please. Continue.
Thank you. I can't believe she's my mentor. So it's like weird to, to be answering here. Well, first of all, with that, I'm sorry that you feel that way. It is always very challenging to talk about race, particularly if you are part of that group. So that is a challenge. And, but the piece that we have to understand is, when I'm I deal with this every day. It is an exercise that I have, so I'm used to it. So how I approach it is I have to acknowledge and listen and hear, because when I hear and acknowledge and listen, then I'm able to apply. But if I'm heightened by the interaction, then learning is not going to occur. No one learns if I'm being reactive to that person's behavior, okay? Someone has to be, I don't know how to frame it in a way where, but it's like, I recognize I live by dignity. And so even if the person is saying something that is offensive to me, I still recognize that they still deserve dignity at that interaction. And part of my role at that time, in my role now, this is my role, I have to educate. I do that all the time. And so I have dealt with situations that were very, very sticky, that were sometimes very uncomfortable. But I tell you, when I apply the dignity model, and maybe not at that time, they may not have gotten it, but years later, that person came back and said, you know what? When you shared that with me, when we discussed that, he said, I didn't get it at the time, but I see it now. And I'm sorry, I did X. I had someone do that to me in my last role where there was barriers placed on me. And they came back and said, I don't know what it is, but the way you handled the situation, because they was expecting a reaction and I didn't give it to them. Because I want to keep my power and my dignity. No one's going to take my dignity away. And that's how I think. It's like, I'm going to maintain my dignity and my power. But once I respond and react, it's like I'm giving up my power. That's how I'm interpreting it from my work. So if you're working in this space, particularly around DEI, it is critically important, because to me, the end goal is I'm trying to make systemic change. That's my end goal. And so I have learned to navigate tough conversations, you know, in a way where I use dignity. Yeah, she should be making you. And I can give you an example where, you know, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind, you know, I had a situation where we were writing about about after what happened to George Floyd. And the CEO wrote a statement, and I according to them, said I did surgery on their document because I felt like it didn't dignify what the people needed to hear. And I had a tough conversation with the person. And I said that, you know, it was, it's not going to feed the soul to the people, and that it seemed a bit elitist. Now, mind you, me saying that to someone of power and saying that what they wrote is elitist, and how I, as a reader, was offended. And so if I'm offended, how are others going to receive it? Now, they didn't take it very well at the time. And I literally called my supervisor and I said, I think I'm going to be fired. You know, I automatically, I just knew that it wasn't going to work. And I used the dignity model and I explained it. And at the time, it was such a heightened emotion at that time with the individual, because anyone, when you start putting red in somebody's work, they're going to be slightly offended. But I was giving the premise as to why. But to that person's credit, they emailed me later on, agreed with my changes, and said, thank you for having the courage to speak truth to power. So using dignity as your framework, not only in terms of bringing people together, but even when things are frayed, is the best medicine, is the vaccine towards that the virus of racism.
Thank you. That's so powerful. We have another question, which is, any thoughts on how love and dignity differ and are connected? I often think of the greatest need being love.
I do think they're interconnected in a lot of ways, but then when people think about love, they think about amorous love, they think about relationships love, you know, in that regard. But if you're thinking about agape love from a religious point of view, you know, where regardless of who we are and depending on whatever faith, but most of our faith traditions talk about the undying love, that regardless of who we are in this universe, that there's a love that God has for his people. So if you're talking from that standpoint, dignity has that element. That's why a lot of people, particularly in faith traditions, I've had leaders, pastors, imams, rabbis love the dignity model because it talks about being worthy, right? And our faith traditions talks about being worthy, that regardless of the challenges you face in your life, if you think about the history of BIPOC, particularly in this country and the world, you know, if you go to, I'm originally from Nigeria, if you look at my family, and they hold on to faith, you know, their faith gives them that dignity, that connection, that community, right? So I agree with you from that standpoint, the power that dignity can have, not only in creating that love thy neighbor as though you love thyself. That is powerful, to love a neighbor who doesn't look like you, who doesn't believe like you, who doesn't love like you, as you love yourself. You know, that is very powerful. So I could see how you would have those connections as it relates to that part. And yes, you're welcome. Yes, as I understand about guilty of losing it, but I tell you, you know, don't give your power away.
Let's just try to squeeze in this one last question, because this has just been phenomenal. It sounds like you're saying that the dignity model is a set of standards that can be used, should be used completely independent of emotion, and that's where its power comes from. Is that accurate? Oh, you're on mute.
I would say yes and no, because, you know, it's about what it does. What people forget that we need the most is emotional intelligence, right? And what dignity does, it elevates and helps us to understand emotion, because we tend to look at emotion as being very kind of whimsical and soft. But actually, you know, a lot of organizations say they require their leaders to have emotional intelligence, because that's where you have innovation, that's when you have high productivity, that's when you have more engaged teams, when you have emotional IQ. And so it's not devoid of the hard science, the data aspect, or however you want to look at it. And I don't look at it as emotion in terms of the whimsical way. I look at it as emotional intelligence in terms of how do we talk to each other? How do we recognize that something is affecting each other? How do we operationalize and get into action? And so those are the pieces. And how do we reflect on ourselves when we're not getting it right? How do we right the wrong? How do we respond? You know, when we do it that way, you're going to have a much better organization and a much better world.
All right, I know I said that was the
Totally.
last question.
I love
feel
that.
like this is a really good one though here.
We
How
have
do
to-
we?
But it is
How do we-
almost 5 o'clock, Kirsten.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
Time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Usually,
Yes,
I-
thank you.
we're trying to be respectful of the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
So
Oh,
yes.
I think Dr. Hicks has something to say.
Oh, please, Dr. Hicks, you're on mute though.
No, I'm beside myself. I cannot believe how powerful this Yemisi has made all this work. She has taken dignity to another level. I'm just blown away, because I've actually seen the presentation. So Yemisi, hats off to you. Hats off to you. It was stunning. And I have a lot of my friends and former participants in some of my workshops are on this, and I cannot wait to hear what they have to say. I think you did a stellar job.
Oh, thank
I
you.
know, and I
Donna.
want to hear more about the Dignity Insult Hotline. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Is awesome. That is
Oh my
definitely,
gosh.
that is definitely, yeah, I'm going to implement that too. But we
Yes.
definitely have to continue the conversation. We really enjoyed having you both on the Anti-Racist Table for conversations. And we want to thank everyone for joining us. We do have a few events coming up that we just want to highlight before we say goodbye to everyone, which are coming up. One this Sunday that I'm going to share the screen so you can see again. Kirsten can tell you about. It's another workshop that we have, and it's about cultivating constructive dialogue.
Yes, with
Open
the
Minds.
founder of Open Minds.
Yes, so that will be this Sunday. It's also a free event. So we're giving you all the resources so that you can break all these barriers and bring anti-racism into work and to bring it into action. And, for fun, because we just, also love Beverly Jenkins and love her Black romance books. We're going to be having a conversation with her coming up in March later on this month. And we want to also just highlight our family challenge that we are wrapping up. It's for families that want to bring anti-racism into their lives with children from birth to 3rd grade. So that will be available in April. And you can always follow us on Instagram and join more of our conversations and join our free challenge at our website. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to
Lynn, we didn't, I don't know if Dr. Hicks or Yemisi, if there's any plugs they wanted to give. Dr. Hicks's books, you can buy them wherever
Yes,
books.
get her
you can buy
book.
books. And her TED Talk. And if there are any other plugs
And
you
her
guys
TED
want to
Talks.
give.
Yes, I would say get her book. Hopefully they're still available because my team, we're buying a lot of them over here. So Leading with Dignity and Dignity Model are 2 great books.
Awesome.
All right, with that,
I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us at the
Thank
Anti-Racist
you.
Table.
Bye-bye.